Okay, so today we're actually going to take a look at the Weller Pyropen WPA2, which is a butane-powered, approximately 50-watt soldering iron. Very practical for field work. Here it's shown with the extremely high temperature nozzle, which is just a straight, sort of like a storm lighter. It's got a catalyst in here. And just straight out, so it produces an extremely warm jet of air, although there's not a whole lot of flow in there, which is something you have to be careful about. This also comes with this, which is a chisel type. I think it's 2.2 or 2.5, might be 3.2 millimeter tip. And what we're going to do today is slightly unusual. We're actually going to use the product in question to enhance it, because this has a lot of thermal mass. It stays extremely warm for something like 10 minutes after you stop using it. So if you're switching back and forth, this can be a little annoying, because you have to find somewhere to put this where it's not going to burn a hole in your desk or something. So I'm just going to make this little stand like that to put it in, and then I'm going to use shrink tubing around it to insulate. So to begin with, we're going to put this aside just for a bit, and we're going to first show how to fill it up with gas. I just use normal lighter gas. To fill it, just hold it like this and make sure this is that way. Let's try to get this in focus. Generally it looks more professional if it's in focus. Now with this one it leaks slightly, but it's not really a problem. And when it leaks a lot like that, then it's full. This one was already quite full because I haven't used it since I last refilled it. There's a number of interesting use cases for this thing. I've used it for field soldering. I use it with this. You can actually use it as a nylon rope cutter, because the temperature is hot enough to melt through a nylon rope, and that terminates the end quite effectively, even if it's super strong winds and everything. 1 second. There we go. So yeah, this is really nice, 3 hours burn time. This sheath here covers it. It's got an open end here. So you can actually put it on like that, and it will, even if it's still running after you turn it off, which it does for a little while, it won't melt. And although it gets quite warm, it feels like a high temperature plastic. And I don't have any concerns about over temperature with this, so it's nice if it's slightly more compact than the models that come with the case. So let's put this one on, and then we'll get to soldering, because what I want to do is first apply some shrink tubing to the sides here, and then I want to solder, since this is just copper strap, I just want to solder it like that to provide support. And afterwards I'm going to put some shrink tubing on the edges here to isolate it from the surface. It won't be super insulated, but should be sufficient, that it won't at least put massive holes in your desk. Also, the butane leaves a pretty nasty mark on your desk, which is something to be aware of. So actually, let's start by applying some shrink tubing to the sides here. Now I want a length that's about that big. So you just buy this in bulk. Just cut it like that, and let's test fit it. I don't want shrink tubing around the top here, because that's where the the hot part will go. And it looks like I may have fucked up slightly here and applied this, I put in the bend a little too soon. So let's screw this. We'll make one that just has one hole at the top here, because bending and then bending this back will probably weaken it quite significantly. So we need 3 holes there, then that bit at the top, and then so we need to cut it here. So we'll use our Leatherman, and there we go. So there. Just get a approximately 90-degree bend there, and then on to the other side. Roughly the same. And try to straighten this out just slightly. There, now let's, before bending it, let's put on the shrink tubing. Like that. It's a nice size, so we'll make one more. Yep, that's that sorted. Now let's demonstrate turning this thing on and shrinking some shrink tubing. Yeah. So first of all, make sure the power is set to 3. There's a scale here, it goes from 1 to 5. There's off-on switch, that's locking, and this is the self-igniter. Now, I'll get back to the igniter because that's been slightly problematic for me. And also this button, it's been problematic, but I was able to sort it out, and I'm gonna explain that next time I disassemble it, what can be done if you're having problems with it. So we'll turn it on, push, and then there's a sound, or squeal from it, and then you just release it, and you'll see that it actually lights up here. Might not come across well on camera, but I think you can see it just there. That means it's burning, and let's see here, there. I don't want to point it at the lens because it's extremely hot when it's warmed up, and I'm a little concerned that it will damage the coating. But so let's use shrink tubing. You want to be at a decent distance because you can see as soon as it hits it, it's just instantaneous, and it's already heating up the strap by quite a lot. It's getting uncomfortable to hold. The flame actually forms almost like a target because it lights up the your target, and that is what in about half a second will be the will have been warmed up quite a lot. And I'd like to just go over it slightly, but yeah, and now it's turned off, and it's still burning slightly, but then it goes out, and this actually glows a dim red when you're using it for long periods, and it gets warm enough that you can use it to reflow solder, even large bits of metal. So let's leave that to cool down very slightly and bend this out to where we want it instead. So let's just put the bend right there. There. And I just need to make sure I'm putting it at the right point. There. Refocus. So, let's get to soldering next. Okay, now we're back, and I've just applied some flux and clamped it into the helping hands. Now we're going to change the nozzle. for a tip. So to do this, you can unscrew this part by hand, even if it's quite warm, because it's a plastic nut. So when that's loose, I like to hold it upside down, like that. And just slide that out. Be careful with this. Now for this part, I normally use a set of pliers to hold it. Just sort of grip it like that, and then just sort of shake it, and that should fall out. Hopefully not too warm. I'm just gonna. I can tell it's cold enough. The hot air nozzle doesn't have as large a mass as the soldering one. So we'll take this and holding it this way, just pop that in there. Now the problem I had with the self-ignition was two bits. One is that the ignition works by actually engaging an igniter, which is this one, it's electric, and then also sliding this thing. In my case, it sort of got stuck here. And I solved that just by lubricating this with some Teflon. And that worked. Second issue is that the insulation along this cable can sometimes shift slightly, especially if you've been trying to figure out why this isn't moving. So in that case, you'll see arcing along this bit, and you just have to make sure it's covered in insulation, and this bit is all the way up there, because then you'll be able to, probably won't show up well on video, but you can see that there's a spark here. Yeah, so I just like to slide that in and then hold it upright if it's cold enough to do so, because there's an exhaust nozzle here. Exhaust nozzle, you want to point that somewhere where you can keep control of what you're pointing at, because it does get about as warm as the hot air nozzle. So it's really annoying to discover you've burnt a bunch of wires and stuff. It usually doesn't happen to me, but can happen. There, just hand tight, no need to over tighten it. The tip should be cleaned properly. I have not cleaned this one properly last time I used it, because it gets very warm even at low settings. So let's try soldering. Turn on procedure, same as last time. It's really quite loud when you turn it on. And release the button. And it does have a slight warm-up time. I also applied some flux in between here. So let's see, it's still not warm enough. There, it's warm enough. So warm-up time is existent but not significant. So let's just give this a try. You can get amazing heat out of this thing. It's just a matter of applying it right. See, I'm already boiling the flux along the entire length of it. So it's just a matter of getting the temperature high enough that the copper can penetrate in there. Sorry, that the solder lead can penetrate in there. The temperature on this is high enough that I suspect it would actually work for lead-free solder. I haven't tried it, but I suspect it would work. So that should hopefully be it. I'll just turn that off for now. And being very careful not to touch anything, I'll just remove that. And it certainly appears to have been soldered solidly. These are just sticky from temperature. Yeah, pending further inspection, I think I'll approve that one. Let's see here. looks like I had solder penetration all around. So really easy to solder metal tubes. Pipes probably work pretty well with this. My choice of copper as material is probably not ideal in terms of being able to touch it. But I'm going to cut the video off here, and I'm going to solder the other side, and then we're going to take a look at how well this stand actually works. Okay, now I've soldered the other side, went really well. So we've got the tip here, which is still ridiculously warm. If I touch it, it'll probably burn all the fat off my hand, and then everything else. So this is going to be slightly precarious, but we'll tilt it over like that, leaving the burner aside. Now the problem is getting this out of this bit so that we can put on the hot air nozzle to shrink tube up the final bits. We're probably going to need a sacrificial surface to do this on, so I'll use the lid of this can. Let's lift that off. There, and yeah, so that's that sorted. We can now put the hot air nozzle in, keeping in mind that this bit will also be warm, although not quite so warm. One thing I forgot to mention is that there is actually a catalyst in these which can be used up. It's also important to get this centered because otherwise it can end up slightly crooked. Also fingerprints get burned in here. So yeah, these will eventually fail with the catalyst burn up. You won't get proper temperature out of them. You know, that's you do need to replace tips on normal soldering irons as well. And as you can see, the hot air functionality is still working extremely, ridiculously well. Just try to get it on the other side here. Now, one thing to pay attention to is the fact that the temperature of this is way above what a normal shrink tube can withstand. They shrink at 125 degrees, but turns out they actually start to boil at something like 500 degrees. So you do have to be careful there. This is now done. We can just put it down on the floor. We just have to straighten out the legs a little, but yeah, that's a nice little project to hold warm tips. And I'm really happy with the WPA2. There's multiple versions. This is the 3-hour burn time model, and I know I've primarily shown it doing heavy-duty soldering in this video, but I was initially going to just splice some diodes and shrink cover that. So yeah, you can do through-hole components, no problem, and with the additional tips I don't think doing surface mount would be a problem either, although you would have to be very careful because it is a high temperature iron. It's not a joke. So I hope this video was useful, and yeah, go buy one of these if you ever do field work. It's way more useful than an electric one.